Hi, y'all, and welcome back to Katie Q's Astro News. So, today I'm going to be talking about the new moon in Taurus that's coming up on this Saturday, May 16th. So, I like to look at the particular stars, and this famous set of seven sisters is actually called Krittika, also known as the Pleiades or Suburu. So Krittika nakshatra is actually one of those nakshatras that spans two different signs. It's kind of at the very bottom of the Taurus constellation, and so part of it, the very first part of it, is in Aries, but this new moon is actually going to be happening on the Taurus side with Mercury and Uranus. All of them are going to be on the Taurus side of Krittika. Actually, similar to Swati, which was what the last full moon was in, Krittika is ruled by an element, and in this case it's ruled by Agni, or fire. Also, Agni is the god of fire, but it's also the name of the element fire. So similarly, we are being guided somewhat by the elementals, and in this case, it's the fire elemental. It's symbolized by a blade or a spear or a pair of scissors, something that has a sharp cutting edge to it. Their Shakti power is actually the power to burn and purify, and their desire is to eat the food of the gods. With that fire and that blade and this desire here, you can definitely see how Krittika has a lot to do with culinary arts, with cooking, even with alchemy or transmutation. You know, alchemy is not always turning lead into gold. It's transforming anything, including emotionally. But you can see this the most with things like the arts, taking raw materials, using your willpower and transforming it into something else. That's what this Shakti power also has to do with, is transmuting from one form into the next through the use of fire. They're also Rakshasa, and their priest caste, this is the first time I think I've talked about a priest caste, and they're ruled by Kama, or desire. So when thinking about Krittika, the first thing that comes to mind for me is light of all kinds, especially because Krittika is ruled by the sun. And so the sun, of course, is our eternal fire, our fire that lights the way for us in the middle of our solar system. But also, of course, with that association with fire, that's our human created little miniature form of the sun. And now, of course, we've harnessed it through electricity. These all have to do with light, and it's the first indication of the created universe. It kind of reminds me of Genesis and thinking of that famous line that God says about "let there be light." It really illuminates to us this physical reality, the manifest world, the creation. This also, in a lot of ways, overlaps with Adam, like the first man, the first created man, because Krittika is a very masculine sign, even on the Taurus end, because Taurus is typically a feminine sign. It used to be that when the Vedas wrote these things, Vedic astrology is based on the Vedas and sidereal astrology. During that time when they were writing, for 5,000 years ago, Krittika was actually the spring equinox. It was the first sign. You get this initiatory, first to come archetype. And as it transfers over into the Taurus side, I think you see more of a reference of Adam with all of his animals existing in the Garden of Eden in this created world. But before Eve, which is more so like the next sign, Rohini, which I'll hopefully be talking about more later in the month during the blue moon. This is the tangible, physical, discernible, real world, the real created world, which is very separate from what I was talking about in the last episode with Swati, where Swati represents potentiality and liminal spaces and places that aren't measurable and are imaginative in nature and more ephemeral as well. But Krittika chooses from these potentials. It discerns, Krittika also means critical. It uses its discernible senses to be able to choose the best potential to bring forward into reality. Swati was in Libra, and this new moon is happening in Taurus. And so you see opposing themes here with Venusian energy. On the Swati side, in a lot of ways, it feels like we're moving from right brain into left brain and vice versa, and switching back between these masculine and feminine polarities. And I know I've been talking about that a lot, but it's just been a theme. It doesn't have to do with gender or sexuality, even though Krittika has a lot to do with homosexuality. Homosexual men, it comes up a lot in their stories and in the research. I more so mean like in a spiritual sense, in the masculine and feminine, in an archetypical sense. It feels like we're really moving from the right brain, from this imaginative, creative, feelings-based, social and collaborative side, into a more discerning, separated, factual, measurable side of Venus. Although Venus is the planet of love, like I said in my last video as well, Venus also has to do with stuff, with values, with things. So we're moving from potential to product, from theory into practice, especially when it comes to finances and business in Swati, because they were a merchant class, and Artha, which was about material acquisition, building wealth, accumulating wealth. We're moving away from sort of business as a science when it comes to networking and marketing and, like I said, theory, and we're moving more into the things that money can buy, the actual luxuries, the physical wealth in Taurus here. And especially because Krittika is a Kama nakshatra, which Kama means your desires, fulfilling your longings and your desires. We are finding a way to choose which of those potentials that we thought of, that we imagined under Swati, and really committing with our discernment, with our critical judgment, to a particular path or a particular choice or product or person, and really beginning to invest in it, because Taurus is, like I said, the second house. It's about values. It's about things that really last. So alongside this theme of the light, like I said, Krittika is also known as the Pleiades. In modern New Age thought, we come across the idea of star seeds, and the Pleiadians are one of the primary ones that you see people identifying with. And actually, a few months ago, I read a bit of the Pleiadian agenda, and I immediately thought of it when I started doing this video, because in that book, they talk about the age of Aquarius and this upcoming age of Aquarius, which sidereally, we still have quite a few years. We also have a few years until the Pluto in Aquarius, so we still have a little bit more time until then, in my opinion. But they discuss the photon beam, that as we go through the ages, this age of Aquarius comes from our revolution around the black holes, Sagittarius A or Mula, that I talked about in my Mula video during the winter. And as we traverse through the ages, which we move backwards, just like the nodes, the north and south node also are considered backwards compared to what we're used to with the sun's revolution. As we move around the Milky Way, we go in and out of what they call a photon beam, which is just like the light that is coming from the black hole or going into the black hole, depending on the way that you see it. And this light, according to the Pleiadian channel in the book, is full of information. And the reason why is because light reveals what already is. And so without the light, we wouldn't have the discernment to be able to know what is or what isn't. We would just be in darkness, in the void of Swati or Maya or illusion. But with the light, we're able to see, we're able to know, and the light penetrates through the black hole of our pupil and reaches our brain. And because of that, it allows us to interface with the joint reality in which we all engage, this holographic universe, they would say, in the New Age thought. And so it allows us to orient ourselves and to be more present and aware and, like I said, interactive with other beings of light So, yeah, it is a really interesting book. It's a little bit different, but I definitely do not discriminate. I am so obsessed with spirituality. I don't really care where I get it from. And so, if you're not really into New Age or star seeds or stuff like that, then you probably wouldn't like it. But anyway, I really did like that they were talking about light as consciousness, as us being beings of light and coming out of the darkness. And Krittika just reminds me of that anyway. So I find it interesting, like I said, that they identify as a Pleiadian channel. Pleiades, or the Krittikas, are also known as the Seven Sisters because it's a collection of 7 little stars together. And like I said, they're right at the end of Taurus, but it kind of in the elliptical ends up being partially in Aries. With this light, with this decisive, separating, incisive side of Krittika, it also reminds me of the chakras, actually. So the chakras in your body are these points of collected energy, and they each are associated with a different color. And I think this is happening because the light, if you think of like a prism, when white light goes through a prism, it turns into the 7, visible wavelength colors like Roy G. Biv that we're used to. And I think the same is happening within our chakra system as the light, as the information from the sun or wherever we're getting our information and our energy from the light of God enters our body. It separates into these 7 different beams of light, and each of them rules a different chakra. So the root chakra is red, the sacral is orange, the solar plexus is yellow. And particularly, I think right now is a really good time to focus in on the solar plexus because of that association with the sun from Krittika. I do think that, focusing on the solar plexus would be really healing right now. So you can do different things. My favorite way to heal the solar plexus is ab exercises. It's been a while since I've done like a core challenge, like a plank challenge or something like that, but feeling the burning feeling of your abdominal muscles, or eating Rajaistic spicy foods like peppers and turmeric and things that really light you up. Also, lemonade. I know that sounds kind of weird, but lemonade can be really good for you because it's yellow, which, working with the colors, like I said, these individual light waves that come from breaking down the white light into its individual colors. Yellow is the healing color for the solar plexus, but also that sort of sour, astringent flavor from lemon is also really good for your digestive system as well, and your solar plexus. The solar plexus also has to do with your will, your individuality, your energy. And so really focusing on what makes you unique and what makes your light a discernible light from other people, and individuating yourself is really important right now as well. Also with the sun, I was thinking about how we are in our solar maximum as well. So the sun, our actual sun in the center of our solar system, it goes through these cycles where sometimes it's very low and sometimes it's very high frequency. And I really do think that those solar flares and that solar activity from the solar maximum is responsible for a lot of the changes that we're going through, and especially collectively, all the collective insights and illuminations are occurring, in my opinion, from us being in alignment with our central star. Also, I think that's probably why we had all of those auroras all the way down here in South Carolina and down even in Texas. I really do think that that was coming from the increased solar activity because, the auroras, we have auroras here, but other planets like Saturn also has auroras, and they come from the sun engaging with our electromagnetic atmosphere. And so it creates those auroras in the atmosphere. I think that that's probably why we were able to see the auroras all the way down here, is because of that increased activity. And it's just something else to keep in mind, because we are also electromagnetic beings, and we also have an aura and a field. And so the sun can also be very draining. A lot of the symptoms of solar flares can be pretty intense, very draining, very tiring, cause your muscles to tense up. And so, at the same time, this is a really good time to rest still. It is still a new moon in Taurus. Taurus is a very slow, low to the earth, grounded sign. And, if you've ever seen a cow or a bull, well, some bulls, when they're not angry or horny, they are a little bit more low energy and slow, and they just want to graze. Thinking of this will center, the solar plexus, this individual light, it really separates us from the lunar masses, from the public, from the general broad opinion when you're able to tap into your own inner light. And I do think working on the solar plexus is helpful for that, but also working on your own creativity. So graduating from the created, like I said, Adam, which also reminds me of atoms, like the individual pieces of matter that, like I said, is what light bounces off of and allows us to discern the 3D world. So moving out of creation, being the created person in the more stupefying and illusory Garden of Eden, and gaining our own sovereignty and graduating into creator. And as you create, I know, especially I'm an artist and everything, as you create, you start to realize that your creations are not necessarily a part of you. They don't belong to you. And they too are sovereign and sometimes full of their own mystery. And yet, at the same time, even though they don't necessarily belong to you, they are a reflection and a fractal of yourself, and it helps you to see your own light by you yourself becoming a creator. So really tapping into that karma, that passion, that inner fire to help guide you into your creations and materialize the things that you want. Even if you're not an artist, any type of change that you see, especially something wrong that you see in your workplace, in your community, in your family, in your society at large, if you will, being that change, initiating that change, and not being afraid to go first as well instead of waiting on someone else. And that's how you can really graduate as well from the sheep, which, by the way, the sheep, hence why I have my curly hair today, is Krittika's animal. And, the sheep also reminds me of Aries, the ram, in that earlier part of Krittika. But graduating out of that sheep into the shepherd by becoming the guiding light yourself. Fire spreads. Enlightenment is contagious. So is inspiration and creativity. The more that you give to your own desires, the more that you give to your own creations, it creates a domino effect and a ripple effect around you. I do think that because Krittika is so critical and so intensely aware and honest, it is a really good time to hone in on issues, like on issues in particular, and confidently control or cut them away. Even if you have to be kind of ruthless, like things that really no longer serve, it's a really great time to purge. Or including with your items, your home, it's also a really good time to purge any cosmetics or old clothes that no longer suit you, cleaning out your pantry of any old food. Things like that will really be beneficial at this time. The Taurus side of Krittika feels much more associated with the blade rather than the flame. I feel like the flame iconography is more associated with the Aries side. And the blade, usually blades are made out of metal. And in Vedic astrology, they have 5 elements, but they don't have metal as one of the elements. But in Chinese astrology, they do have metal, and metal is even more dense and heavy than earth. When you're thinking about cutting things, pruning things, shearing things, keep in mind what it is that's going to have the most longevity, the most permanence. Taurus is a fixed sign and it's fixed earth, but then, like I was saying, I think that metal is even more dense and even more long-lasting than earth. It's kind of like when you upgrade your pickaxe on Minecraft from like the stone to the iron. It's kind of like that. So really thinking about the things that you want to last or that can last should be your priority when making that decision. Like I said, coming out of the darkness of Swati and choosing your next step, really think about the thing that has the most longevity. And also really try not to burn out or get too drained. Really try not to burn yourself out during this time. Like I was saying, Taurus is a really great time to rest. A new moon in Taurus is very low energy. It's very similar to that new moon in Pisces. But also, fire really needs fuel. And fuel, when you think of gasoline, oils, fats, waxes like candle wax, those are all Shukra. And Shukra is Venus, actually. So, really tapping into, again, those desires. Venusian energy, the feminine, it's still very important right now because we're balancing these polarities within us. And so while we're cutting away, pruning, burning, initiating, it is important to still balance that action with rest and replenishment, specifically tangible replenishment, physical rewards, and try not to burn through all of your resources. Try not to, steamroll even people. Try not to burn through people or become too critical or too harsh and cut back too far. And really try to focus on Venus and your own pleasure as well. Like I said, that's where that lemonade can come in. And Venus right now is actually in Gemini. It's in the sign Mrigashira, and Mrigashira is ruled by Soma, and Soma is actually a friend of Agni. It's also an element, technically, and Soma is this sweet, cooling moon nectar. You can kind of see it that way. It's also like a plant, like an herbal plant that allows you to feel disconnected in a way, but not in like a dissociative way, but disconnected in a more peaceful, relieving sense. And so I think that leaning back on your front porch when the sun gets really hot, when it feels a little bit too draining and too overwhelming and too bright, just taking a reprieve from the sun's overbearing heat and scorching nature with some nice lemonade, sweet tea, or some type of delicious soma can be really helpful during this really intense, fiery, but still low energy new moon in Taurus. That's pretty much what I have for you. I recommend getting in touch with your creative side, cooking and gardening, doing things that have to do with fashion, things like tailoring especially, or getting a haircut, trimming your beard, doing any sort of grooming like that, editing work for your art or writing, and safely engaging with fire, being in contact with your own inner fire and your own passions, while also trying to not push yourself too hard, not burning out, and also really be careful when engaging with other people, because this is a very brutally honest and frank sign. Yeah, just be a little bit careful, a little bit wary with that. But otherwise, I think that's everything I had to say about this new moon in Krittika. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.